Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome outside to Nature Folklore Sessions, 27th of June, 2021. Well, I hope you're live there. Lovely to be with you. I just sort of heard a bit of a technical issue here, so I trust that you are hearing and there's no echo. Please let me know if there is an audio thing, and excuse me for a moment while I kind of sort this out. Something happened that shouldn't have happened on that introduction, which is quite embarrassing. Let's see. Okay. No, I don't think we got a problem, but let me know if there is echo, and I'll get that resolved. There's a way of doing it. So thank you anyway. Thank you for joining me here for our weekly time of exploring nature-centered folklore, connecting this to within your favorite sanctuary space, and so pleased to be outside here in the center of the tree labyrinth here, and expressing your inspired visions from your sanctuary through your poetry, writing, art, craft, performance, problem solving. Now, this afternoon, this is one of the Ogham series I present, and this is Ogham, the Ballymote Bards story. It's really around the Book of Ballymote. So, as I say, part of the Ogham series that I do. And these are nature folklore sessions and Carrowcrory Labyrinth Gardens here. I always open this up because this is how things happen. It comes to us thanks to our wonderful subscribers, and subscribers are watching today. They watch every week, which is fabulous. So thank you for your continued support, because without that, I may not be out here hosting this today because of the subscriptions and other costs. So that's lovely. So let's see who has joined us here today. So thank you for joining anyway, because this beautiful sunny warm day that we got. And someone here through the YouTube. Hello, Scottish descendant living in Borloo. Where is Borloo near? Let us know a bit about that. That'd be fantastic. Yes, thanks for joining. And I hope you're hearing. Sherry, thanks for joining. I hope you can hear me there okay. As I say, I think I've got a bit of a sound issue. So please confirm you're seeing and watching okay. So good morning to you anyway. It's lovely. So let me know that I'm coming through loud and clear. Good morning from rainy New Mexico. That must be Donna. Raining, goodness me, we've swapped places here, haven't we? Yeah, thanks for joining. And then I was asking a question. British colony, Australia, Perth. Oh, wonderful. We get someone actually watching us from Australia. Do you know, I think that's actually a first. So that's wonderful. Thanks very much for joining us there. And Sherry mine, yes, perfectly well. So I can get on with the show with complete confidence. Now, this is many people today, as I say, it's an Ogham subject, and this is probably going to be a bit more academic than what I usually present, or have been lately anyway. But many people today, they certainly love to handle the Ogham as a mystical subject, and also divination, using Doham as an instrument, as a tool for divination, very popular. And within storytelling today, we are told of ancient origins of Ogham, such as through the deeds of the Bronze Age, Tuatha Dé Danann, and then there's this lad, or Ogma, or Oma, and I think I have a picture of him, and there he is. There's an artist's impression of Oma, and he. Let's get rid of this for a second, then we'll get back to, because this is going to be very photogenic today, lots of photos. So make sure get the photos to you in proper order, I hope. Now, Oma or Ogma is claimed by storytellers to be the original teacher of Ogham, and this is way back in 2000 BC. So there he is, chipping away a piece of stone around 2000 BC. Now, I love these stories. They're inspiring, they're guiding. They even give us a bit of psychic truth, I believe. And just like really people who read and have faith in books like the Bible, the Quran, Torah, which is very important for millions of humans on this earth. So why not treat the Ogham in the same way? I have no problems with that. I get a lot of flack for saying that, but and I've even written my own account of Ogham's Tale of the Trees. And after today, I'm going to have to rewrite it, and you'll understand why as we go through some of the things I'm going to go through today. Now, there is a controversy of linking Ogham to trees, and surprisingly, and I'm going to be talking about that in relation to the Book of Ballymote manuscripts during this afternoon session. And now, many of the myths of Ogham, and the tree connections, they really actually come from the Celtic Romantic years. And here's a lovely Celtic Romantic picture just to get you in the mood. And that was an era that kicked in about 1840, about the same time as the Industrial Revolution came along. It was really spinning its wheels. And I may talk a bit about that as well a bit later on. But if you think that's weird, wait until I talk about the Green Man on the 18th of July, because the Green Man mythology is actually a lot younger than 1840. So it's actually younger than the Celtic Romance mythology I'm talking about. But I think the Celtic Romance perception of ancient Ogham kicked in due to some romantic fascination and even envy of ancient Chinese get the word right. Hieroglyphics, that's what they call it, isn't it? Their language. And it's only within the last 50 years it's been established that some of these ancient Chinese hieroglyphics go back 5,000 years. And we want our own to be that old too. I actually worked with a company that was working with a herbal formula that was actually on jade that I think was 3,000 years old. So it goes way back. And like the ancient Chinese written language, we want the language to grow and flow from the ground upwards, just like the trunk and branches of a tree. And there's a lovely illustration, artist illustration. I love that one. Kathy Holton picture, I believe that is. And so we're passionate. It's for these reasons, from the ground upwards. There we have something being said, and we're passionate to call the Ogham a tree language. But some modern researchers are actually claiming we're linking the Ogham to trees just purely for romance and for convenience. But I'm not to go any further with that one today. That's for another session. But it does seem certain that the Ogham was the first language alphabet that was used to record information for archiving purposes. And there are some lad chipping away there. That looks more like 9th century, but anyway. And this is to express a fairly easy to learn, I suppose, duplicated language. It's something families used to have their own oral languages, but if you had a duplicated language, you could spread yourself wider apart. So some say that the Ogham was indeed the first Irish language. Now, there's going to be a dispute about that a bit later within the next half an hour, because there are examples of these Ogham stones in Wales, Cornwall, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. Now, the coupling up of Ogham symbols that we got here is obviously for short messages and announcements even. They're not actually for putting together scribed literature, which is what I'm going to be talking more about this afternoon. And I'm assuming that all of you here watching this are aware of what Ogham symbols look like. I've showed you a few examples there. But if not, by the end of this session, you'll get the flow of what it is, I'm sure. Now, the earliest versions of Ogham were actually not in the BC years, probably not in the Tuatha De Danann, or Donnan, even though the mythology tells of that. It's probably from the 4th century. And it was a collection from that point of 20 symbols that expanded to 25 symbols around the 7th century. So we're left with questions. We talk of Ogham being a tree language, but if you've looked at it, those 20 symbols, 5 of those are not even trees. In fact, 4 of those oddballs are not even bushes. They're not even shrubs. They're grasses and creepy things. So the one question is, what came first? The scribing alphabet, the bunch of symbols, or the trees, or, of course, the two matching together. In fact, when I was first taught about Ogham in Scotland, I learned some from a father's family, but the real lesson was from an Atty McKechnie when I was working with him on Iona. And he was a fantastic storyteller, and he gave me a great thing. But I talk about that in other Ogham sessions. So another question is, how did Ogham symbols get translated into the Latin ABC? Because you notice in some of the things I'm showing here, it gives you an Ogham alphabet, and then it gives you, I haven't got a picture of that coming up yet. That's something else. But there you go. There we go a bit. There's a tree alphabet, and there's the Latin symbols. We got the Ogham there, and we got some runes kind of stuff there. But how did it get into that Latin ABC? Where was that understanding? How was that started? And when the Ogham symbols are translated to Latin symbols, why is there no duplicated first letter? Although in this example there is a duplicated. You got col and you got court, which is actually 2 C's. So that could be confusing. But as you know, probably from a lot of the Ogham that you look at, it's quirt the apple, that you see the Q rather than the C. But Q wasn't exactly in the ancient languages. It all gets very confusing, hence how there was something assembled during the Celtic Romance of the 19th century. And language scholars, they just, a lot of them regard Ogham as just a very primitive, limited, and totally impractical language, or even why, how do we dare even call it a language? But there's a recent scholar at Trinity College Dublin, Damien Mcmanus, who I'm going to feature quite a bit this afternoon, and he regards Ogham as highly sophisticated and very efficient. And I will, as I say, I'll be sharing some of his thoughts very, very soon. But if I asked you, where did you first see your Ogham, you can put it in the comments. And I'd probably be right to say that the way you saw it was when it was actually carved on a stone somewhere. And there's some Ogham carved on a stone, ancient standing stones. And I reckon a lot of these standing stones were actually there standing maybe for thousands of years before someone came along and literally graffitied on the stone, on the corners there. And one thing you in pictures coming up, notice that's always on the left. That's an Irish stone. And the Welsh one, you see the writing's always carved out on the right. No idea why that is. But anyway, on the corner somehow. And of course, some of you might first come across Ogham when it was burned into tourist gifts around Ireland or Wales, around the UK. So you end up buying something like that. And that might be your first introduction to Ogham. Or you might have seen pictures of these stones or Ogham on gifts from Etsy. That's a typical Etsy kind of thing. So I present a separate session about Ogham on stones, and I call those stones the pissing stones, because there's very much a relationship between them and how a dog or another animal actually marks their territory by pissing on stones or trees. So this seems to be an important use of Ogham up until the 1930s as a boundary. This is my boundary. So that became a very common use. But I'm going to talk about that next on the 26th of September on the Ogham session that I have of that. Now, some people, they describe Ogham carved stones as memorial stones. Do I have a memorial stone here? I think I have, yeah. This is an actual sort of modern use, and I think this is from the 1930s. And indeed, that seems to be one of their archiving purposes. And there are some scholars that claim Ogham scribing started in the southwest of Ireland before early medieval, before 400, as early as 300 AD. And that's because many of the existing Ogham stones in Ireland are clustered around Kerry, Cork, and Waterford. And there's also some stories of those Ogham stones that were actually stolen from those southern regions, and they were brought up north and scattered. And I'm going to talk more about why and how that happened on Sunday, 26th of September. Now, other scholars, such as Damien Mcmanus, who I've mentioned, they claim that Ogham isn't Irish, that it actually came from Wales. And there's a map of places in Wales. Look at that in Pembrokeshire, down the southwest. And that Ogham actually has come to Ireland through a Welsh tradition. Now, I'm going to explain a very novel exchange story about this on another Ogham session on the 28th of November. So there's a few to look forward to on the 28th of November. That's going to be at Ogham, the Iona scribe story, as I mentioned them through Atty McKechnie and me and Iona. But either way, whether Southwest Ireland or Wales, it's believed that the first Ogham scribes, they also knew some Latin. And Latin had been scribed for quite a few hundred years before Ogham was ever known about or even scribed. Now, what throws this is Ogham on stone has been preserved for us. We can actually go around the country and go into fields and we can see stones. We see carved Ogham around Ireland, Wales, as you saw there. But any Ogham that was carved on wood back then, it hasn't been buried in the bog. It hasn't really been discovered. So we don't know about it on wood. Now, the one theory I love is that scribes found it very difficult to translate primitive oral language because families had their own languages. And the lad here from Australia, you might be familiar, of the hundreds and hundreds of Aborigine languages. I gather, I've heard a quote of over 600, but it might be more. And to actually talk to your next door neighbors, you had to work out what their language was too. So, getting that orally, how do you translate that? You're a scribe, you've learned to do a bit of scribing. How do you put that down? So the scribes, they needed a simple scribing language in order, because it was very difficult to translate an oral story into the Latin that they'd learned. The Latin was too complex and there'd be a lot lost in translation. So there's a theory that the stringing of Ogham symbols together, though not a complete language, may have been a string of prompts. I used prompts this afternoon, on the session to remind me what I'm talking about. So you get a prompt, supposing an Ogham symbol was a prompt, and from that you can remember an oral story and you can relate the symbol to a section of the story. That's just a theory I've got, and it seems to be a practical one at a time. And that seems to be enough to stir up our belief that Ogham is a very ancient language. I think that's part of why we think it's much more older than early medieval. But what more, I think is more in like, what's more likely is that Ogham was the first tool that humans used to capture the beautiful ancient oral stories, the oral language. And this attempted capture of this oral language was obviously very limited in the 4th century. As I say, the 4th century, they had the Latin. I think the first scribers, thanks to them knowing a bit of Latin, could actually make some sense of the Ogham and put the two together. And that, I think, increases the feasibility of there being a tree language. So before there was the Ogham symbols, one of the duplicating languages that I do believe is possible is a reference to trees, because the association with trees, that's what the people had. Everything was trees. And we take that for granted now, because trees were needed for nutrition, symbolism, economic significance. The ancient people, is as if they were so connected to the trees, their language really had to be adopted to that. Even the birds, they say the birds, when they're tweeting away, they're establishing their territory on that particular tree. So even the birds, when we hear them twittering in the tree, that's a tree language. And then there was councils then that decided on the manner of things, and the stories of heavy penalties on people who damaged trees if they weren't given permission from the councils. So when the Ogham symbols were created, each was known as a fader. Talking of tree language, a feather or a fader. And I had a lovely symbol for that. Let's see if I can find a feeder. There we go. There's a nice artist's impression of an Ogham symbol next to a tree, oak tree there. And a feeder, which is the name for an Ogham symbol, is actually a word that means tree. And even today, young primary school children in the west of Scotland and the islands who are learning the Gaelic, the old Scottish Gaelic, they recite the 18 letters of the alphabet in order to learn the Gaelic, and they're trees. There we go. That's what they learn in the primary schools. Look at that, all those trees there that you're familiar with. But there's 18 of them. And we talk of the bringers and springers of the speakers. Springers, that's thinking Spaniels there. We talk of bringers and speakers of ancient-based languages. And we actually call these people Gaelic people, or Gaelic people, or Gaels, don't we? There's another collection of the language there. So in Scotland, you're probably familiar, there's the county of Argyll, which is really a twist from Era Gael. Era we know from Era, or Eriu, that we call ancient Ireland, and Gael as the language of the people. Well, that's what they speak. That's what we refer to. So in Scotland, Era Gael story, I'm going to share more on other nature folklore sessions. But Gael and the Welsh word gwiddle, or giddle, seem very similar. And this is thinking, did it come from there, the Welsh again? And in the Welsh, it's a description of the wild man from the woods, wild man from the forest. And this is the place here, Broch Gwiddel, or Broch Giddle, which is in Wales with the trees. It's got a church behind, so it's actually a place name there. So it's assumed wild doesn't mean angry, ferocious, and warlike, but a description of someone who lives wild amongst nature, amongst the trees. So many people researching that these days simply call those people, the Gaels, the people of the forest. Now, in early scribings, 5th century time, Columkill time, the people at the time, they were kind of known as Aryan or Aryan, Aaron. But for some reason, by the 7th century, after Columkill was way gone, scribes were more eager to call the people of Ireland Gaels. And this was because from the Iron Ages in the BC years, early BC years, the forests of Ireland were actually cut down at an alarming rate because it was needed to make the charcoal, to make metals, because tribes and clans were starting to war with each other. There were Viking invasions, that kind of thing. And they weren't replacing the forest. The management wasn't very good. They weren't replacing the trees and forests in the same speed they were taking them down. So where were the people of the forest? They certainly weren't in the forest because there wasn't a forest for them to be in. But in Wales, their own people of the forest word, that has actually changed. It did change from giddle to gidden. And that means a scholar. Although this is a wood, that's giddle wood. But the word is, suddenly it's transformed from people of the forest into being a scholar and a scientist. Well, that's natural because people in the woods, from the woods, people of the forest, they brought that wisdom. And if people learned Latin and became scholarly, then that wisdom suddenly becomes, it goes into an elitism. You think, say Maynooth. Maynooth has Celtic studies. So all these stories that the children are told, their grandparents, their parents told around the fires, in the cottages, it suddenly got elevated into doctorates in Maynooth University in storytelling and Celtic studies. So that, I think, is what's evolved from being the people of the woods to people that were scholars, saints and scholars, scientists, and people of learning. They got status. And these were the people that became the druids, that became the chieftains. And in Ireland and the west of Scotland, the educated people of Erin, of Scotia, Alba, all these people were suddenly becoming known as Gaels from the 7th century. And Gaels regarded as being the educated ones, the scribes, as I say, the future druids and the chieftains, rather than the lowland peasant people of the forest. So by and from the 7th century, scribes still had not archived many of the old native oral stories. This was still a challenge, still a project. And they were frantically trying to do this through their learned Latin that had also advanced quite considerably from the 4th century to the 7th century, through those 300 years. And this built up a kind of a Gaelic elitism. So, you know, the Gaels were, it's a bit like the Celts. The Celts, the Celts, you know, the Celtoi. And then suddenly people were proud, I'm a Celt, you know. A similar sort of thing happened with this Gaelic tradition. And the scribes also engineered how to bend Latin symbols into a written language. And this was their own Gael being scribed. And this is what I'm leading into at the moment. Wrong one. That one. This is it. This is their Latin, Gaelized, lack of a word, is their Gaelized Latin, I suppose, or Gaelic Latin. That's a little bit of it. And this would enable them to handle the translation of oral languages much better. They'd advanced from the Ogham prompts, which couldn't do this. Now they were actually scribing the whole story because they had a language to do this in the 7th century. And that was Gaelic, an educated language of scholars. And so it was a blend of old language into Latin format. Now, from this Gaelic boom of the 7th century, Ogham also altered considerably. What was then, and this was the next one I put up by mistake. Earlier, I was showing you the picture from the ground upwards of the tree, like a tree growing. Suddenly, Ogham was being scribed horizontally. And there we go. It's there in a horizontal. And maybe that was convenience. Maybe it's to make the Ogham appear more scholarly. I don't know. And at the same time, 5 more symbols were added to the original 20. Do I have a there? There we go. There's something that adds that there. And see at the bottom there, you got the 5 extra symbols. They were added on, and that's all on the horizontal there. So by the time of the 14th century, the time of the Book of Ballymote, a lot of oral language and stories were still not recorded. But scribing in the Gaelic language, using the adapted Latin and Greek even, it became a very efficient archiving craft. But this became a craft that seemed to be exclusive for recording heroic stories and battle stories, stuff like this. And there was very little being recorded of nature folklore stories because they didn't really enter the folklore ones, like what I do, the nature folklore, they didn't really enter into respected literature until this Celtic romance time, the 19th century, 1840 onwards. And perhaps at the time it was important in the mid-19th century because there was landscape changes going on. There was the Industrial Revolution. The landscape was being pulled away. There were factories, there were cities. All this was going on. So I feel that this was a kind of sanctuary. The old nature folklore is a kind of sanctuary where people were grouped together, and as a kind of therapy. But way back at the time, from the 7th century up to the 14th century of the Book of Ballymote, it was the medieval scribes. They were sponsored and patronized by chieftains. Now, the chieftains' priority was to preserve the heroic deeds of their ancestors and their line of ancestry, their own identity, and what was to come. You know, they had to be the heroes and get the respect. They were like characters out of DC comics, and that's what the scribes had to portray them at. I suppose Trumpism of the time, maybe. And the priority for them was not to have the scribes identify flowers and trees, weather changes, stuff like that. So the scribes, if they wanted to be fed and have shelter and health services, they had to stick what was asked of them. And I suppose it's a bit like with our jobs today, isn't it? So by the 14th century, it's likely that the unscribed oral stories were the ones of nature folklore. But that's my speculation. But if you go to Dukas, I haven't got it up on the banner, dukas.ie, you get the children's collections from the parents, grandparents that goes into the nature folklore. It's a beautiful collection. But though the extra 5 symbols were added to the 20 original symbols during the 7th century, and scribing changed from vertical to horizontal, it didn't save Ogham being overwhelmed by the Latin, by the Gaelic. And this was the preferences then. And even standing stones with Ogham carved memorials changed as well. They were no longer the standing stones. They were these. They became flat. And they got Latin inscriptions rather than Ogham inscriptions. So that's how that got changed. So this in mind, it's remarkable, actually, that the 14th century Book of Ballymote was actually patronized or patroned to include some references to Ogham. And there's now become an important reference and resource for scholars and researchers in Ogham to actually verify the use of Ogham and its existence. So today's Nature Folklore session, although it's titled Ballymote Bards Story, I hope to have time to carry some chat of how the Book of Ballymote was created. But if not, I'll make short videos for the subscribers. But priority today, I want to move on, as hinted earlier, into an Ogham, a bit of Ogham that I've not presented before. And before I do, one more thought is how elitist Latin education, scribing and reading would have separated the educated from the farming people, the fishing people, the foragers. So was Ogham then simply a scribed language that they could use, as they would have had the tools to cut the stones and wood, rather than the scribes who were stuck to their pens, inks, and parchment? And that's a Brandeboot stone in Scotland. I'm going to bring that back up again in a minute. So was this a class difference? You know, the peasants had the Ogham to mark the boundaries of how they worked, and the scribes under the chieftains and the druids, they had the Gaelic and Gaelic. Also, a priority for survival was much more, you know, for the peasants, their survival depended on the nature folklore, much more than the hero mythology that was being scribed by the elite. Anyway, I'm going to go on to the Mcmanus work, and I've gone on a fair bit there, and I haven't said hello to you. So let's see who's doing. As I say, it's very much a scholarly one today, and there's all these lovely comments from you. And then we got those Sherry. I can hear perfectly well, thanks. And Tina Rock's with us. Beautiful day, isn't it? It's fantastic here. 19 degrees and sunny here. I think probably the warmest Sunday I've given the broadcast. So that's great. Elizabeth Flynn, hello. And Gary is here. Brilliant. Excited about this one. Well, I hope it's making sense. As I say, it's different to these sort of chatty ones that I often do. I haven't got any videos, haven't got any guests. The guests that are invited, they're off doing something else. So thanks for being with us, Gary. And everybody pop along to the ancient wells of Ireland if you aren't so far. And Lumen, hi, good evening to you. Lovely to have you along. Lumen's from another part of the planet. He's way out east. So lovely to have you along. And Shelley, good day, love, learning good day, love. Oh dear, I put myself in the shit there. Anyway, love learning about own symbols. Well, I hope you like this. I think, Shell, the next bit I'm going on to is you're going to find really fascinating. And John, another cracker today. It is Elizabeth, and thank you for joining us in with this crack, which is going to be a cracker as well. I was introduced to tree essential oils, all related many years ago. That's another subject. I think I do cover it in one of the sessions, but it's a fascinating one. And we must go back onto that again. Good morning, Glenn, as well. And Elizabeth, another great session. Glad you're not bored yet. And you're weeding in the tunnel listening to this educational Sunday here. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you there. And good morning, Glenn, and Sherry and Glenn. Got a very close association there, which is fantastic. Thank you for the love there, Glenn. And Joey Sparks, hello from Indiana. And Kate's here. Kate, all new information to me. I'm glad you're enjoying this, Kate. So thank you all for taking part of this. And now I'm going to go on to some very serious stuff. And I've never presented this before. So let's get on with this. And I'm absolutely fascinated. This has converted me. It's made my book out of date. So I'm going to have to bring a second version out because I really believe what this lad is saying. And what I'm talking about here is I'm going on to the stuff I'm going to present my version of stuff that's been lectured and out in a book by Damien Mcmanus. There he is. There's Damien Mcmanus. That's in his Trinity College outfit there. And Damien, he brought a book out called A Guide to Ogham, and it came out in 1981. But sadly, it very quickly went out of print. And it's available secondhand, but boy, the prices, it's usually €200. Maybe you find one for a bit less. Incredibly expensive secondhand. Another one I'm going to look out for, he has one called the Ogham Stones. I don't know if he goes into the stuff I'm going to be talking about now, but there's that one away. But a bit about Damien Mcmanus. He's a professor, well, he was a professor of early Irish at Trinity College Dublin, and he's also was head of the Irish department, and he's only just retired. There's the retirement day they had for him. And he's also, Mcmanus is also director of a wonderful bardic project at Trinity as well. And that project, I'm going to have to put the link up later in the comments, but it's published over 500 medieval Irish poems, and they're fascinating. So it's worth having a look at that. But to continue with my interpretation of Mcmanus's approach to Ogham, I'm going to use some help from another author of Ireland's Tree Myths, Legends, and Folklore by Niall McQuaiter and Makita. And kicking off, let's kick off. I'm going to go through the alphabet for you and show the Mcmanus variations. So we've got Beth the birch. It's nice and easy. There's a birch tree, very straightforward. A lovely way to start off Imbolc, the new awakening of the year. So there's no change there. And already I'm saying birch, Imbolc. If you've got my Bathing in the Face breath book, the second half of it, the Autumn Tales of the Trees, I go into the seasons because there is a folklore association that we have the 4 seasons. They're the cross-quarter days as we know them. We have the Imbolc, we have the Beltana, Lunasa, and so on. And all that stuff in between. So those are the 4. And you're probably familiar with the Gardner approach with the White Goddess, where he's taken 13 of the trees and associated them with moon times, and tends to use it in an astrology divination type format. And then there's others who've taken the whole 20 symbols, original 20 symbols of Ogham, spread it around the year, and it gives it like a few days of each, doesn't it? And then the approach that I learned was to actually spread it as the 4 seasons of our lives. So we have the spring of our life is after we're born, we're individuals, and that, as individuals, all we're aware of is us and our senses and what's around. And then we suddenly realize in order to move on from that, we go into our Beltana type of life, which is we learn how to relate things. We realize we're not the only ones here, that we're part of everything else. So as we learn that, it's like going from the blossoming to the creation of fruit. And so we go through that to Lunasa time, which is really the harvest of how we relate and what actually comes from that and what we associate with. And literally harvest, as Lunasa is harvest time. And then we go into the someone back to the Imbolc, very much our divination time. I suppose it's our time where we are the mentors, where we are people seek to for our experiences and so forth. So anyway, I'm drifting into another session here. So let's get back to Beth, it's just give you a quick introduction of why there's going to be the associations of the 4 quarters. Anyway, Lush the Rowan comes up next. It's from an ancient word for flame. Do I have a rowan tree here? I should have. There we have. A bit of a faded rowan tree, but that'll do. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because I've randomly put some unprocessed photos. So I'm going to give you a much better background. So fuck off. Sorry. I go find. There we go. Let's give us a better background. I'm trying to change the background here. Now, why is that up? Oh, the manipulation of it. I'm trying. Okay, maybe if I'm going to put that there when I change. I haven't done this for a while. This particular, when I put unprocessed photos in. So let's see what happens now. I suppose, yeah, that's not. I can't put myself into a background. Okay, you'll just have to bear with a bit of me and the trees in the background. So anyway, Lush the Rowan, ancient word for flame, because of the rowan's red berries there, and it's also fitting around Imbolc in early spring. I know there's no berries then, but there's an association to Bridget and flames as well. I don't have a Bridget and flames here, I don't think. But the men in council, when you used to get men in council, there we are, some men in council. I don't know if they got rowans on their heads there, but what they used to do was burn rowan sticks, some rowan sticks there. And the idea of those is to bring about peace amongst the people in council at their meetings, and the burning of the rowan was to bring, it's the calling of the goddess to them for guidance, and the essential oils person might understand that. So we move on to the third one of this acme. The 4 are Acme are the 4 quadrants anyway, and we're moving on. The third one, fear in the order. No problem with that. Similar ancient word describes the order. It's catkins, and also the red sap in its inside the bark there. And then we got Sally the willows next up. Sal or Sally, again from an ancient word for willow. And it's a tree that's very important for the bees in the spring. So it's very important to be in this quarter as well. But on to the next one, Nun or Nin. Now this is where for ash. And it's very vague because Nin or Nun, it comes from a word that translates as a forked branch, and we know that just about every tree has forked branches, don't we? So McManus, this is where he started getting bold, and he said it's the wrong word, wrong tree completely, and he believed there had to be something different as the 5th tree in the spring acme. So McManus, he believed and researched for a better interpretation of the own word nin, and that was his studies, going back into ancient languages, seeing what people were saying, because he thought the scribes, because they were under the rulership and the sponsorship and patronage of these chieftains or druid, and sometimes they had to make do. That's my feeling of it. So he thought he'd do a more thorough research, and he linked into a Gaelic phrase, kosushi. I think I've got spelling. I haven't got spelling for many of these things today. I'm sorry. That's it there. And that's it kind of translates as establishing peace, and kosu being sustainable, and she from, as you're familiar, from the other world. Now, sustainable, he suspected as referring to the provision of nectar, because honey and nectar not only important for the honey, but for there wouldn't be fruit, there wouldn't be nourishment, as we know, if there's no pollination of apple, of hazelnuts, and oaks even. So that's what was regarded perhaps as sustainable. So the clue for the tree placing here by McManus was a tree that had to be of abundant blossom that would then lead on to fruit. And I wonder if you can think of one that isn't in the Ogham, whilst I try and find a photograph of it. But I'll now go into the reasoning process that McManus had how he got from Cossachy to Nin. But McManus concluded that the cherry tree was much more suited for this place. So for the fifth one, he's thrown into the Ogham something completely different. The cherry tree, very much a spring tree, much more suited than knowing the ash. So there's where the controversy starts. Now, the cherry tree instead of ash, as I say, I think is great for that transition from the spring towards the Beltane. So we're now going on to the second act, which is the season from Beltane to Lucina. Lunasa. So we have Hutha Hawthorn. And bring up the Hutha Hawthorn here. There we go. There's one. We've recently had that experience of the wonderful flowers. But a lot of people, when they talk of Hawthorn, they throw a lot of fear in with it too, don't they? Because in Ogham, Hutha Hawthorn is the first tree of the second pentatonic. You know, these acmens, there's 5 trees. I'm going to talk about notation. And you think of the pentatonic scale, which has 5 notes in the scale. And it's much more ancient than what we use in notation now. Definitely from the Africas, for instance, the call and response chanting, that's all pentatonic. And it's amazing how that is very much in music. So here we go. We're kicking off our age of Beltane to Lunasa within the Ogham. And we think of the Hawthorn not only of fear, but of mischief, superstition. We can't bring it into our homes. And here's an illustration of superstition, of mischief. There we go. Hawthorn Tales Brewery, Hawthorn Mischief. Maybe that's the stuff to be drinking right now. And the fragrance, you know, we're familiar with the hawthorn blossom. I'll go back to the blossom picture. It's a fragrance that starts sweet and it's enchanting. And then a few days later, it smells like rotting flesh. Absolutely awful. If you've got hawthorns, you'll be very familiar with that. But it's a tree that causes us to either awe or fear the fairies. But anyway, for all that chat, McManus declared, right, Hawthorn's in the right place, so we're good. So next we have Dúr Dóir, the oak. Do I have an oak? No, that's not an oak, is it? Do I have an oak there? Yeah, that's a good old, very old oak there, isn't it? I think that's the Sherwood oak, I'm not sure. And he regards that as highly placed anyway. So the next one, really, Tidna Holly. And McManus declared that was fitting because tin itself describes a bar of metal, hard metal, such as iron. And so holly, it is a very dense wood, and it was once used for the shafts of chariots and carts. And also the handles of weapons, such as knives, daggers, swords. So McManus said, yeah, holly's declared appropriate. So there we go. No problem with that. And then we've got no problem with coal hazel. There's a lovely bunched out hazel tree there that has the green nuts that start forming around Lunasa. And there's also no dispute over the quote, the apple, despite being weird if there's 2 C's. And so the Q is thrown in for the Kurt or Quert. But Colin and Kurt, as I say, those 2 C's, they could be a problem, couldn't they, if you're trying to make a language. There's a lovely story of the ancient wording of apple that links it to the relationship of enchantment and healing. But I'm going to leave that to our Apple Wisdom Day, cover that in full. But the third Agme, we're moving on now into the Lunasa to Samhain collection. And this is, we're going to the one symbol, the first one of this, Moon the Vine. It's probably the most confusing of all. Vine of what? So for this, McManus looked into the meaning of moon and discovered various interpretations, such as the neck, where a neck joins, also description of the path of the voice, thickets, description of deceit, slaughter, and even love. Now, I'm not going to explain his journey of discovering all these various meanings of moon and min, but there it was. And in the common flow of words in the translations, McManus realized that whatever the description was, there was like a root interpretation that goes back to purging. And there was a tree that was once used a lot in medicine for purging. The herbalists amongst you probably understand this as buckthorn. And it's not the seed buckthorn, but the actual buckthorn. If I've got a picture, I've got a picture of its berries here somewhere. Very widely used, I think, still in the USA. There we go, some buckthorn berries there. And they ripen at this time too. They're actually ripening at this time after Lunacer, so very appropriate. And so, of course, McManus says that's much more appropriate to kick off this third ACMA. And then Gort the Ivy is the next one. And people are familiar with it, being, as I say, Gort the Ivy. Some scholars of Ogham, they say it should be Gort the Honeysuckle, because the Irish for honeysuckle is Edlum or Elan, and Ivy is Eden. So you got Edlin and Eden. And McManus thought there might be have been a crossover in the way that they pronounce this. But at the same time, he said, no, ivy and honeysuckle, they're not trees. So they're not standalone trees, so that can't be right. So he suggested this was a total mislead in medieval times, especially with pronunciation, because for ivy, he said that he reckoned that people pronouncing Eden and Eden, I haven't got the spellings up, I'm sorry. But Eden is Eden Ivy, Eden, I mean, goodness, you know, even if it was me, they would misunderstand me. But Eden for Aitean instead of Edeand for furs, or what you may know as gauze. So McManus, he said he favoured furs or gauze in this position. And there we go. You might be familiar if you're going through Irish roadsides. If you go through Oregon and the Abandon in Oregon, if you see them, you're going to get roadsides full of that. And a lot of us today regard it as a pesky weed. But in medieval times, this was a great value to land. The furze itself, it's a wonderful nitrogen fixer. If there's been any mining or pollution from a factory or there, bring the furs in, and it actually it cleans the place up. It can really deal with pollution amazingly. It turns toxic land back into fertile land again. And it used to be harvested considerably in autumn or fall for livestock bedding and fodder, because when it's dry, those needles, they soften up. And so it's very different to the farmers burning the gauze and the furs like they do today. So McManus concluded, instead of Gort the Ivy, let's go for Gort for furs or for gauze. Gort the gauze. There we are. We got that. And then straight after them, we got nettle or gettle for reed. You know, that's not a tree. Reed. Yeah, that's a very bizarre one. So McManus points out the gettle once was translated as the act of wounding. And he found a relationship to a Welsh word, gwenu, which meant the same thing. So gwenu, again, as a pronunciation, crossing over the water, gwenu, gettle. He seems to think there was a link in the change of pronunciation. So thinking, you know, as I say, the act of wounding is the relationship. And so you know, gettle has been used for the reed, it's been used for fern, it's been used for bog. So all these things have been applied to this Ogham symbol, the reed, the fern and bog myrtle. But none of those old names are translated into anything related to wounding or stabbing. So it's a long story, I'm going to skip it, but McManus arrived at that'll being fitting to Broom. And there's a nice bit of Broom that you might be familiar with. And the first thing you might think of, oh, that looks like the gorse, doesn't it? And a lot of people call them all by the same name, though they are very different. And this is very confusing. But let me show you. If you leave them alone and a single, they become quite magnificent trees. So there we go. There's a gorse. I know it's a thin, very thick trunk there, and massive gauze, massive flowers on the top. But notice how it's got small flowers. Look at that one. And let's move on to what happens when the broom turns into a tree. This is a broom tree. Look how more full that is. Thicker trunk and much more floral. And actually the flowers of the broom are actually bigger than those of the firs. So he puts those two together as a kind of twin at this point of the Ogham. Really, as I say, they look similar, but the one thing about the broom, it has this lovely vanilla smell. You go past the broom and you get this vanilla-ish. Sometimes if you go past the firs, the gauze, it has a bit of a coconutty smell. So there's definitely a fragrance difference, and the broom is much more abundant in fragrance. And the uses are very different too. Of course, we know broom for making brooms, from the sweeping brushes, and broom is used because it doesn't have the needles. It's used a lot in weaving as an alternative to willow and hazel. Now, stories tell of broom being used to heal wounds. Now, this is where it comes up. It was a wound healer on battlefields. If someone was wounded, grab the broom, and it would actually, if you could actually make tea, or if a person would eat it, it would slow down the blood pulse, slow down blood oozing out from a wound, and it would bring about sleeping as well. And that relaxation slows down the wound, and of course it allows the wound to dry up somewhat. So and there's your link to the wound there as with the broom. So furs or gauze together with broom, according to Mcmanus, it's now the gauze or furs, then nettle the broom. So next, moving on, we got Struff the Blackthorne. And I forgot to bring my walking stick out here, because Struff once translated as being sulphur. And you might be familiar with that. If you put sulphur on silver, it tarnishes. You get black tarnish on silver from sulphur. And then you got the black. There we go. There's a blackthorn there. Struff the Blackthorne in blossom. And look up close and look how black those branches are. I wanted to bring my Blackthorne walking stick out because that is very black. Some people think I've actually varnished it or something, but I think that's very much fitting to the sulphur description, and the burning of sulphur too, of brimstone. And in the fall, in the autumn, people pick the sloes and mix with the crab apples. Makes a great jelly if you mix with the honey. But try eating those sloes by themselves, and it's as if the fruit itself is sulphur brimstone because of its bitterness. So there we have Struff the Blackthorne as well. So it's a confirmed one after all that. And then we have Rush the Elder. Rush the Elder, like Lush the Rowan, starts with a different letter, refers to red, and elder fruits were once used in cosmetics to get the red effects of cheeks. There's a Victorian woman getting her red cheeks from her Rush the Elder right there. But in plant medicine, rush was used on red spots, blemishes, on skin conditions as well. So the berries as well, they're harvested, as you're familiar. Well, that's not the berries. That's what we're doing now. We're getting the elder. We're making our elderflower cordial and stuff like that and preserving right now. But anyway, Rush the Elder is appropriate thanks to its fruits, the red. Well, they're black, but they're red when you kind of crush them down. But we're now going into the fourth acme. This is the So Unto Imbolc one. And there's a controversy over the very first one. Should it be pine or elm? And alum or alum comes from the word palm, apparently. And it came to our shores and it lost its P sound somehow. And so ancients here regarded pines as palms and not the elms. And there we have a pine there, a lovely illustration of a pine. And also this fourth acme from So Unto Imbolc is regarded as a time of transition, of regeneration, of transformation. a time when old harvest debris becomes fertile again for spring. And it's interesting that these 5 winter Ogham symbols, they're also vowels. They're the vowels in the whole Ogham. So we'll kick off this 5th Acme with Alum the Pine. We'll stick with the Alum the Pine. That's what McManus did. And then we have Ohn, O-H-N or O-N-N, on, which is traditionally described as furze or gorse, which I've already talked about. But that we assign that to the autumn. McManus did anyway, through the furze and the broom. But Ohn, O-H-N, or Owen, they're both actual old Gaelic words for ash. And you remember we pushed the ash tree out, not knowing the ash in the first Acme. It's arrived here instead of the gauze. And there's an old Welsh word too, ornum, which is symbolized as revelation, because when the lush leaves of the ash fall, they add so much fertility to the land around it. A lot of animals shelter under those leaves in winter. They're going to be pooping and stuff. You're going to get the frogs, the toads, and the worms will come up, and there you've got that transition of where the fallen leaves give the fertility of the forest floor and all around. And so that gets into folklore as a kind of revelation of transition. So, of course, McManus replaced New in the ash with New in the cherry, the end of the first Acme, and speculated the ash is much more fitting here as on the ash. So another look at the ash there. So that's that. And now we're going on to the heather. Again, more controversy here. What have I got here? There's something on the ash. I've already given it. There, that's the ash. I didn't show you the ash before, did I? There we go. That's a real ash tree anyway. We got a lovely local holy well here that has an ash tree that's as mature as that. There's a few ash trees. So that's the ash. Now I'm going on to the heather. The heather, another non-tree. And it seems to be short for a word as Urav, or Urav. Let's see if I can get the pronunciation of this right. I should have written it out for you. Is Urav Aviv, I think that's it. Aviv, Urav Aviv, a cold space on the earth. Anyway, so it became known to describe graves, and urn is short for that too. The heather, urn, graves. So urns shortened anyway. And so it's a long story, but McManus speculated that is much more fitting to the elm. So here we have a bit of an elm here, because the elm always seems to have a cold, slimy, and rotting bark. Another elm one there, magnificent. And it's because the elm pulls up and stores an incredible amount of sap. It's a tree with a lot of sap. It's, even in Irish, it's known as the cronur, because of the amount of sap that pulls up. So out goes the heather, in comes the elm, the helm, and we're getting towards the end of these now. So McManus, we go on to the 19th tree, which McManus didn't dispute. Here, the poplar, or eardab, the aspen. But there's confusion too over this naming a bit. I'll give you see if I can get an aspen tree up for you. This is an aspen. There we go. There's a bit of an aspen there. And I'm not going to explain about that more this time. But let's move on to the last, but not the least, is Hugh or Eod. I'm trying to think of all the different pronunciations. U is the one I know. I-O-H-O-U, or Ida, or Ia. They're all U. And the U, here we go, a regenerating tree that connects us to our past, to our future. And though McManus in his interpretation of Owen replaced non-trees with trees and shuffled trees into more appropriate seasons, two native trees of mythology in Ireland. They're missing still. I'm going to give a flash of the U again. Anyway, the two that are missing, because I don't have pictures of them, are white beam and juniper. And the mythology of white beam is very close to the hazel, very much a tree of understanding and wisdom. And the mythology of Jupiter, also quite a regenerating tree, especially if you find it in deserts, very close to the yew. So McManus wonders, why have they been missed out? Why is there no white beam and juniper? Anyway, that's my version of McManus's reinterpretation of the Ogham. Sorry I don't have a chart listing of them. I'll try and get something up at some point somewhere. But other scholars are claiming do not relate trees to Ogham in the first place. They teach that the symbols came first, then we associated trees later, and it's just equal to associate animals, rocks, etc. to Ogham. But Ogham is a standalone symbol. That's what some scholars say anyway. But I'm sure you got your own opinions. I'm very strong with the tree language coming first. But what I was first taught in teaching, the Gaels had an oral tree related language. This is the Brandybuck stone that I want to talk about. And that's a pick stone. And it's carved with symbols. If you look, it's a bit dark there, but you see the Ogham on the left. And this was put together for archiving purposes, obviously by the Picts, with their own Pict symbols on the right there. And so the question is, did the Picts actually add the Ogham to an existing stone of symbols? Or did they have the Ogham symbols themselves? And the tree language people came along and said, that's interesting. I think we can use that to associate with our trees. It's never known which way around this happened, but they are on the stones. So the Ogham might have come later along with the Pict symbols, or it might have been the Picts that inspired the tree people. So we just don't know. We just, and I probably never will. We'll just dream and be inspired by that. But there's also the potential long debate is, why is Damien Mcmanus's research valid, as it smashes hundreds of years of recorded archiving? And let's see, I've got something. There he is. There, that's him. Yeah, that's him in Trinity, studying some archiving. That's the last picture I've got of Damien Mcmanus. So my argument is that I think the scribes themselves could have been lazy in their interpretation and assembly of Ogham in their scribing. And probably Ogham verification was probably far from top priority of their patrons and providers, as I've already explained. So Damien Mcmanus may well have researched more into ancient language associations. I bet his research was much more than the scribes ever did. And that's what inspired him to arrive at revising this Trian Ogham alphabet from his own very deep studies. It wasn't just make it up as you go along, as some people say this might be. So I think that's it. I'm going to go into the Book of Ballymote in a minute, if you don't mind the extra time. Let's see what you've been saying. I know I'm very noisy on this one. Let's see. There's Gary. Second one. There we go. I like to know where. I love the pronunciation like Ogham, and yeah, I had noise. I forgot. Yes, you can call it Ogham, I suppose. I find, I know my pronunciation is off, but Ogham just sounds. I can't get my tongue around that. Ogham is what I say anyway. Don't need to say anything about the holy thorn tree. That's for another session, that I'll go on to. When I go to the Iron of Scribes, which is in a few weeks' time, I'll talk a lot about that because of an experience that I had with the thorn tree, Christmas thorn on Iona. Very important to that next one. In Northern California, there are organized groups of volunteers who will go out to eradicate broom. Yeah, they called it invasive. I never knew anything about broom. Certainly not that it could grow like a tree, but obviously it's clustered together close, so we only see the bush version. But definitely, as you see, that's what happens when it's isolated as a tree. Quite magnificent, though. quite weird. There are uses. If, for instance, where there's been fracking, supposing there's been fracking or tar, tar sands in Canada. Once that stuff leaves, tin mining, anything like that, coal mining, get the gauze in there, get the furs in there, let it bring the nitrogen back in and the rotting. It bring nature in. It'll encourage the birches to come in and woodland will start up. The firs can be a foundation tree in its own right and get things back going again. And depression, yes, it is a I was going to go into that. I think I might. We'll see how we get to on that. But it's a good point. The gauze tincture for raising depression, even in my almost tale of the trees, I kind of refer to that as well with a story I got in that. And as Thomas is here, hello, good morning to you. And there we go. Holly for protection. Certainly the holly for protection. Again, that's another own subject. As I say, I'm cutting a hell of a lot out, but thanks for mentioning that. That's going to come up on another session. Hawthorn, my birth tree, hazel. And that's when you're, that comes from applying, I think, the trees to the annual cycle, like the Wicca 13 symbols, or I don't know, it's people who try to cram 20 into a year. This is all modern divination. It does help, but it is part of the Celtic romance, and even, I suppose, applying the 4 seasons of our lives like I do. It was just what I was taught in Scotland. Some of the farmers always plant a rowan tree near the barn as protection and against fire here, Elizabeth. Yeah, a lot of these trees people think of protection. Elder is for protection. There's obviously the hawthorn and the rowan. The rowan certainly for protection, funnily enough, to stop people being fiery at each other, especially men. So maybe that's sort of translated out from taming and calming people in council, that maybe it protect fires, actual fires. That's why I think there's perhaps a cross thing there. Now, okay, Sherry, Shams, so happy you joined us. Elizabeth, Kate recovered the inspector. There we go. All right, great. Okay, I hope you don't mind me running a bit of overtime. There's a lot here. There's a lot I'm throwing out. John, you're in education yourself. Thanks very much. I was going to put this into a video, but I'm going to continue this now. As I say, it's titled The Ballymote Bard Story, the Book of Ballymote, and I haven't really said much about it. So I better say a few words. And its importance as a verification tool, also for the history and use of the Ogham alphabet. So here we go, the Liber Ballymote. Let's get back to my pictures for the Liber Ballymote coming on. Where's my pictures? There we go. We'll bring a bit up there. There we go. And look at that one. There's a dog chasing a rabbit, I assume, and that's from the book. And of course, Ballymote is only it's 10 kilometers, 8 miles away from where I live here at Carrowcrory. This was scribed at the end of the 14th century, one of the last of the major books. And at the Castle of Ballymote, there's an aerial view of the Castle of Ballymote. And the book was ordered by Tonalta de McDonough. Sorry, I haven't got the spelling up, but Tonalta, he said, come on, lads, let's scribe this book up. And so this scribe book is very late in medieval scribing, and very much in the traditions. And of course, books, scribe manuscripts, they were currency. A chieftain needed a book. I think this happened after the Battle of Books, the Columkill thing. And I thought I had a picture of that. I might do later on. But the book they had, that was used as a mascot by the chieftain. This is who we are. This is the strength. Rather than standing stones, orm stones, or billy trees, they had the book, the Cathach of Donegal. Anyway, so it was worth, it was worth everything to the clan, the tribe, and also the monastic community. So very valuable thing. And this came very late in this tradition of creating wealth. So he wanted to put one together quickly. So he got some scribes together. There was Solomon O'Droma. He was from Fermanagh. I think I've got an artist impression of him. There he is there, hard at work on the scribing. And there's Robert McSheedy. I think this is him. No, sorry. That's the, what am I going? I'm getting the pictures all muddled up. Right, let's see who I've got. Right, that was just the scribing of the Ballymote. This is the artist impression. This is Solomon O'Droma. He's from Fermanagh. And Robert McSheedy. This is supposed to be him thinking about his scribing there. And there's an artist impression of them all. And this is all of them in the Scriptoreum in Ballymote. They're working. Now, the Book of Ballymote compilation, it's an older bunch. It's like a collection. It's like a Reader's Digest. It tends to be a bunch of manuscripts have been handed down through antiquity. It was something the MacDonagh clan had, but they all kind of all over the place. And he wanted them knitted together. This was the heritage from his ancestors. And so let's put it all together. Now, if you go into the Coach House, it's a hotel in Ballymote. It's got a bar. It's just opened. It's kind of opened up a bit after the COVID stuff. And if you can actually get into it, into a reception, into the hallway, you see on the wall, there's massive pages from the Book of Ballymote. And the old one is there. It's quite magnificent. A copy of that. Worth seeing. Visit the Coach House and see this. And you got the first page you got, as you open up the old Book of Ballymote, if I can get the picture here, there we go. That's the first page. It's Noah's Ark, and that's how it was conceived by one of the scribes. And there's also a sketchy form of Noah's Ark here as well. And this was followed by a brief history of the Jewish people, their stories and traditions, which is a weird thing to put into a scribe book, which was trying to collect all the local stories. But at this point, they wanted to get the history of the Jewish people. To set an example, there was templates going on. Obviously, it was very Christian at the time. So people were curious about the Holy Land and so forth. So this was into the book. And the medieval scribes and abbots, they were also very keen to introduce Jewish tradition too, especially the practice of banking. We know where that went. And there's also pages about Patrick and Cormac MacGart, wonderful stories of Cormac locally. I'm not going to go into them now. And then there was the Triads of Ireland. The common triad was geography, customs, and law. And this was, this time, the 14th century, was the cusp of Brehon law transitioning into becoming the Jewish style of commandments and judgments, which is what we have now, that the 10 Commandments seem to be the basis of legislation, and so we're led to believe. We have judges and juries and guilty, non-guilty, and then you're off to barbaric prison and all that. No, it's very different to the Brehon law, which was based on a sort of a council judgment, mediators, and then compensation, reconciliation after that type of stuff. But there were other triads in Ireland. That's not just the only one. We got another one here. Truth, nature, and knowledge. There we go. There's another triad here. And there's another one, and this one is very self-explaining. Another triad of Ireland. There you go. Anyway. Then we move on from the Jewish stuff into sagas of Brian Boru. Here's an artist's impression of Brian Boru. As I say, it's a mishmash of stuff in this Book of Ballymote. And then it goes into the professions of a poet. And in that, there's the sagas of Finn the poet. And actually, the word Finn means poet. So it's amazing how many, even Finn McCall was said to be a poet. So there we go. Finn is a poet. And there's lovely stories about Finns. There's a lovely one, Lochmela, outside Keju. I'll save that for another time. And then it finishes off, surprisingly, with Greek stuff. You got the Greek stuff here, like the destruction of Troy, the wanderings of Ulysses, and Nestor's speech to the Greeks. But the important thing I'll get to is Ogham was also charted, and not only in its, as I was saying, its horizontal form, but it had circles. And here we go. This is what the scholars love, because here we go. It's charted into circle of seasons. Here we go. This is the indication of the 4 seasons there put together, which is what I've been talking about. And this is the only time it's appeared on these books. So it's quite amazing that their patron, their sponsor, allowed this into the book. And the chances are that somehow the McDonoughs had actually acquired this from their own ancestry. Might not have been compiled from their ancestry. It might be someone, and they might have got this from the Greeks, actually, because when I was learning astrology and the Greek origins, I saw plenty of charts like this as well. Also in Hindu astrology, they use charts like that. So the source is unknown, but let's leave it there. It's strange. It's our best example, best ancient manuscript example of splitting up the Ogham into 4 in its pentatonic way. And there we have it. And that pretty much explains a lot of what I've been talking about this afternoon. But going back to the professions of a poet and the Ogham writing language, now, ask any questions as we go along. What about Ogham as a notation? Speech and song were once one. It's said that we spoke as song, just like they do in maths, I suppose. And each Ogham symbol had a tone. And Columbkille, he was right into this. Now, this is not Ogham. Yeah, that is Ogham. I was going to show something. Anyway, I'll come up with it in a minute. I think I was going to say something with notation here. Anyway, there's Ogham. Perhaps think of that as notation. But I'm going to talk about Colum. This is an illustration, somehow some told, of when Columbkille studied with St. Finian. And there's a bit of confusion because he studied with a Finian in Drom near Ardee in Louth. And this gets mixed up with a Finian or Finland or Finan in Moville in Strangford Lough. And it was at Moville, that's where Columbkille did study the Psalm scriptures. And here's some old Psalms with some notation. That's not Ogham. And he studied the Psalm scriptures there. And it said that these Psalms that he studied actually they were songs, as you know, Psalms are songs. And Columbkille made a copy of them, including the notation. And legend says that Columbkille copied all of this because the Psalms were notation marks were Ogham. And Columbkille scribing this copy at Mohill is what set off the long saga of the Battle of the Books below Benbourbon here in County Sligo. And the result of that is talked about the Catholic. He got there's a story of how he got the book back for his family. So his own family, a branch of the Northern O'Neills, that's what they got back. Lovely metal covered remains of the book, the Catholic. And every time they had a dispute, they would wave that at people, just in the same way as Trump and all other people. If they got a dispute, they shake the Bible at people, don't they? Oh, you will be condemned, you are doomed. And the Catholic was used in the very same way. But I'm going to leave all that stuff to a session at the end of January. Any more comments from you there? Have I missed anything from you? Are you still with me? Because I'm really going on, aren't I? Hey, we don't have any guests today. As I say, these nature folklore sessions brought to you through the support of you lovely patron subscribers. And so I'll be cheeky and bring that link up back again. So thank you for your support on that. And I'm putting up little videos just of these sessions and other things that the patrons are now getting at last. And I'll put the course together. I think it's going to be next winter now. But just $1, euro, or £1 a week, a month. Do it. Anyway, coming up, let's talk about what's coming up in the Nature Folklore sessions to come. Next week, we're back to a potluck. Get your poems together. We're going to have a poetry session, create poetry. And that's going to be the 4th of July next Sunday, which is forecasted to be a very rainy day. So we'll be inside, even thunderstorms. So with your poems, either be on live or make video. You know, these video clips I've been showing, pre-recorded with photos. I can put them all together for you. Be lovely if it's all your contributions anyway next week. So I won't be talking that much. And then on the 11th of July, this got postponed, but I'm looking forward to this. We have Dana Driscoll, as you know, as the Druid Gardener. She's going to be presenting an amazing book that's officially released tomorrow, Sacred Actions and Sustainable Practices. And I love this because it goes around the seasons like I just done with the Ogham, but she's a gardener. I mean, she's the real thing. I mean, I always say people they really don't deserve to be druids unless they got soil in their fingernails and they got their hands in the soil. So she's looking at sustainable practices, and it's very practical stuff, by at the same time acknowledging, appreciating, and what's around us, the landscapes around us, the traditions around us, the seasons. And in this book, she's really put into a book a lot of the themes I cover here on the Nature Folklore each Sunday. So no wonder I'm giving her a larger kind of session to talk to you. And if you've seen her before, she was on a herb one, I think, in the past. Wonderful speaker. So it's going to be a delight to have her as a guest, because that's what she does. She's a university lecturer, and she's just wonderful. We'll have her on next week for Sacred Actions. And then another one I'm looking forward to bringing back again is the 18th of July, Discovering the Ashlings and the Green Man. That's quite poetic because it's applying folklore to exploring our deep passions, the stuff that's deep within us, even the hurts in us, as well as the joy, the three strings of the bard, of course, the joy, the dancing, the melancholy, and the dreaming. And we bring that out in our poetry, writing, music, crafts, dancing, drama, all that stuff. So we're going into that we're going more deeply into that, and how we explore our deep passions. So there's going to be some poetry and stories in that too. And we'll have folklore stories of the Ashlings arousing the passions of men, and we'll bring in the Green Man variations arousing the passions of women. And the Green Man folklore and mythology, as I said, it's not as old as you may think. So I'm going to go into the stuff that created that Green Man imagery. Fascinating stuff. Anything else you would like to say today? For those of you who are still wonderfully with us, I see there's still a few of you there. So thank you so much, because it's been these sessions are getting longer. I'll make it shorter next week, I promise. So thank you again, and no guest today, but thank you all for watching the broadcast. Those of you who are watching this later, please keep commenting here. I do come back from time to time to answer comments. Subscribe, the bell icons that you get on YouTube and Facebook they remind you of what's on the following Sunday. It's one way of getting to know what's going on. So I just thank you again all for being with us, and wishing you a fabulous week full of joy, enchantments, inspirations, all the wonderful stuff, because we've got, especially in Ireland, we've got a beautiful weather week ahead. So until next Sunday, play well, and that's what I got for today. So thank you very much. Bye-bye to you all.